Am I gonna get cancelled for making this video when I'm an only child?
I'm an only child.
Welcome back to my channel. So for those that have seen my other videos, I've made who is the most iconic mum on Disney Channel, most iconic dad, most iconic best friend. Today, we're going to be talking about who's the most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. There are so many pranksters and mischievous kids to talk about in this video, so let's get right into it. But first, let me preface something. I'm only going to be talking about siblings that are secondary characters. For example, I'm not going to be talking about Zach and Cody because they're both equally the main character, so to talk about which one is the more iconic sibling doesn't make sense, right? And also, right before we start, please turn off your ad block, that would really help me out. Let's get into it. Starting off this list with Matt McGuire, Lizzie McGuire's younger brother. So Matt was a prankster. He was mischievous.
Well, I think I'm looking forward to cracking up.
He was a telltale on Lizzie. In the first episode, he was like,
Lizzie's talking about dressing like Britney Spears.
and Mum and Dad were running up that stairs being like,
Britney Spears is the one who got all developed, right?
And that was all because of Mr. Matt. Furthermore, he was also the class clown at his school, so his main life goal was to cause as much mischief and mayhem as possible. But at the end of the day, he was a lovable brother that did have Lizzie's best interests in mind sometimes.
I have a family that loves me and even a rad little brother. Yeah, you're pretty rad. Sometimes annoying, but I wouldn't want to be annoyed by anyone else.
But his pranks and his mischievous ways were incredibly iconic. I think we all remember Mr. Matt McGuire. He is definitely in the running for most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. Moving on to Pim on Phil of the Future, she was Phil's younger sister. She was another prankster, another troublemaker, just like Matt McGuire, except to a different extent, because some of her efforts were for literal world domination. She was trouble. She was a little troublemaker, but also because she was from the future, she was kind of somewhat mature for her age. And once again, at the end of the day, just like every other sibling that I'm going to be talking about on this list, she did love Phil. There wasn't much of a sibling rivalry. They actually had a pretty good relationship. Her rivalry mainly came from her goody two-shoes neighbor. She was basically like Ned Flanders from The Simpsons. She just hated her because she was nice. Yeah. Moving on to Cory Baxter. This is a legend. Why? Because let's just like get it right out of the way. He is so iconic that he got his own spin-off show. So obviously he is a very iconic sibling on Disney Channel. So one of the main things that Cory did on the show was that he was always in a get-rich scheme. He always tried to find a way to make money. And he was successful in some of his attempts. He also was kind of Megan Parker status with like having a bunch of like technology and spy gear and equipment that a 9-year-old boy would not have, but he did for some reason.
He's not so smart.
There was like this era of kids television where they kept on making the youngest sibling like an evil genius. Cory had this charisma that was just super likable on the show. He had a lot of B plots on the show where sometimes he would get into hijinks with Eddie and Chelsea or with Larry when they had their band. Him and Raven lived under the same roof, and obviously the show was following Raven, but a majority of his plots had nothing to do with the fact that he was Raven's brother. Most of it was his own storylines. Do you remember that one episode with the juicer and he was like terrified of the juicer?
The juicer.
Cory's relationship with Raven was really sweet actually. Obviously they have a bunch of, you little nasty.
Cory! Cory! You better wake up, you nasty!
The best episode that showcases their relationship is where Raven was kind of like the teacher's aide for Cory's class, and then they all go through the different tale of the events of the day that happened. Raven paints herself out like some like angel that was sent from above, and then Cory was being really mean to her. And then Cory's story of the events was that Raven rocked up as like a demogorgon with like salad in her teeth and was being really evil. And then the truth was just like, it was a big miscommunication, both are kind of at fault, yada yada yada. But they had a pretty good relationship. Kyle Massey was such a good actor. He played Cory so well, super charismatic, and like I mentioned before, such a good job that he got his own spin-off with Cory in the House, which we aren't going to talk about. But truly, Cory Baxter is definitely in the running for most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. Moving on to Jackson Stewart, the older brother of Miley Stewart on Hannah Montana. So Jackson was, in reality, Miley's like 30-year-old brother that was still going to high school. So Jackson was a goof. He was always getting into hijinks. He was not the most sensible character. He had his own storylines because he worked at Rico's Shack and got into a bunch of hijinks with other characters, but mainly Robbie Ray Stewart. Does anyone else remember that episode where Jackson gets a car and then Robbie Ray's like, "That's a girl's car. We need to modify this girly." It was strange, but I bring that up because it really does show the relationship between Jackson and Robbie Ray. Jackson also had a pretty good relationship with Miley. It seemed like there was always that kind of underlying rivalry, and I feel kind of bad for Jackson because I feel like he consistently would always mention the fact that he feels like he's in his sister's shadow, right? Because so much attention is on Miley. She's constantly going to recordings, concerts, yada yada yada, getting a bunch of attention from that, right? And then Jackson's kind of like, I'm just a regular teenager working a minimum wage job and I feel like I'm in my sister's shadow, and Miley was never really considerate of that, to be fair.
Well, I guess I'm so busy making sure that Jackson gets some attention, there wasn't enough left for you.
Mama, do you know how that makes me feel?
Kind of invisible.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the way your brother feels all the time.
He never said anything.
What's he gonna say, sweetie? Don't be Hannah Montana? He wouldn't be a very good brother if he said that, now would he?
He was goof, he was funny, he was drawing faces on his stomach and making it talk. Ha 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 ha. He started the cheese jerky business, so he's also an innovator and a genius. He is definitely in the running for most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. Moving on to Justin Russo, that was the older brother of Alex Russo on The Wizards of Waverly Place. So Justin was known as the A+ student, very sensible, used magic the right way, followed the rules by the book. He also worked at the family sub shop, just like all the other kids, but I feel like he was like a good kid. He was never getting into like trouble like Miss Alex Russo over here. I do feel bad for Justin, and I feel like, thank God, spoiler alert, he did end up keeping his powers after the family wizard competition, because let's be real, even though Alex was the main character, at the end of the day, Justin was the most deserving of keeping his powers. Alex was like using and abusing. Justin's relationship with Alex was kind of complicated because I feel like I would be incredibly frustrated if Alex was my sister, but just like in typical fashion, he was also a funny character. So he is definitely in the running for most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. Moving on to Max Russo, the younger brother of Alex Russo on Wizards of Waverly Place. He was known as the goof, the one that didn't really have his finger on the pulse of everything. Kind of like a golden retriever, right? Just this kind of lovable, airheaded character. Does anybody else remember that phase where he wasn't on the show and he was turned into Maxine? Does anyone else remember that? Why was that? Is Max the first gender fluid character on Disney Channel? Wait, okay. So he was more similar to Alex in the sense of they were both abusing their magic more than following the rules. However, Max never abused powers in the same way that Alex did. Alex was like, how can I use magic to my advantage? Whereas Max was more kind of just like, I want to turn this orange into a cupcake. Do you get what I mean? And he loved both of his siblings a lot. And I also feel bad that, spoiler alert, he didn't end up keeping his magical powers at the end, so he just ends up inheriting the family sub shop. I'd be mad, so sorry Max. And Maxine. He is definitely in the running for most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. Moving on to our first 2D sibling, Candace Flynn, who was the older sister of Phineas and step-sibling Ferb on Phineas and Ferb. So at the beginning of every episode, Linda was like, I'm going out. Candace, take care of the kids. I don't care if you want to go hang out with your friends. I don't care if you want to do something else. You're going to take care of Phineas and Ferb. And then Phineas and Ferb get into some trouble. Well, you know what I mean. And then Candace was like, this is dangerous. This is not okay. This is ridiculous. This should not be happening. I'm going to bust you. I'm going to bust you. I'm going to bust you. You're breaking several government policies right now. I'm going to tell Mom. And Mom was like, no, babe. No. And I'm also not going to pay you for taking care of the kids all day. Candace does love her brothers, but at the same time, every episode, she really did want to destroy them. She got some really good songs on Phineas and Ferb. Let's talk about Squirrels in My Pants. Let's talk about Queen of Mars. Those were some bops. Moving on to PJ Duncan, who was the oldest sibling in the Duncan family on Good Luck Charlie. PJ was just like a really, really nice guy who was a little bit airheaded, and that was what made him likable. And he was also very, very passionate about cooking. He had a band with his best friend. He was pretty much the polar opposite to Teddy. Teddy was the sensible one, the voice of reason, and PJ was kind of the complete opposite of that. He was ridiculous, he was goofy, he was unserious, he was so unserious. Moving on to Gabe Duncan, who was the younger brother of Teddy on Good Luck Charlie. He was the sarcastic one. He used to be the baby of the family until Charlie came into the picture and he was like, I don't like you, girl. He was definitely the main troublemaker sibling in the family. He was a little bit Machiavellian. He was kind of like, Mom, Teddy is doing something naughty, and then would run to Teddy and be like, Teddy, Mom knows what you're doing. You gotta hide your plan, and like, she's gonna come get you. Quickly, run. Why were you doing that? Do your homework. Moving on to Charlie Duncan. I mean, the show's about her, but she's a flop. In the first few seasons, she was giving us nothing. She was just sitting in that chair doing nothing. Sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, she did something silly, like she locked him out of the house. Girl. I'm not going to be talking about Toby Duncan. He made no impact. He didn't even make the bubbling underchart. So, Moving on to Flynn Jones, who was the younger sibling of Cece Jones on Shake It Up. So he was definitely mischievous, but then he was pretty mature for his age. When the show first started, he was only 9 years old. So in the first few seasons, when someone would knock on the door of the Joneses' apartment, Flynn would always be like, I'll get it, Mom. I don't even know if she was in the house. It was like a catchphrase, but I was kind of like, this ain't given. This ain't a catchphrase. This ain't sweet niblets. This ain't dang flabbit. This is, I'll get it, Mom. He was also really into magic, but he wasn't the best at it, so kind of a goof. Like I said, I think the main thing to take away is that he acted pretty mature for his age, and he did a very good job.
He's the only mature one in this family.
Moving on to Emma Ross, the oldest sibling of the Ross family in Jessie. So Emma was stereotypically the girly girl. She was popular, but like not in a mean way. She was just popular because she's girly. There's not that much else to her, right? Like, I think we were all kind of just like, okay, she's just blonde and conventionally pretty and somewhat funny. Next, moving to Luke Ross in Jessie, he was the prankster. He also loved to break dance, he was funny, he was definitely the most troublesome sibling out of the Rosses, but also kind of had like a heart of gold. He was kind of like, I'm gonna stand up for what's right. Moving on to Ravi Ross, he is the most recent addition to the Ross family. He's kind of just like only been with the family for like a month or so when the pilot episode happened. He was definitely the most risk-averse sibling. He was very like, I don't know guys, I don't know about this. And then also he was most known for having Mrs. Kipling, the second gender fluid character that I'm talking about in this video. Because in the beginning of the show, Mrs. Kipling was Mr. Kipling because they mistakenly thought that it was a male, not a female. Also, another really sad thing is that if it wasn't for a typo, I don't think the Ross family would have adopted him, which is kind of sad, right? There was kind of some joke where they were like, yeah, our parents thought that they were adopting a baby that was born in 2011, but there was actually a typo in the document and he wasn't born in 2011, he was born in 2001. So yeah, my parents accidentally adopted a 10-year-old that we didn't really want. He seems to handle that pretty good. Moving on to Zuri Ross, who is definitely the most slay. She was sassy, she was funny, like that is my favorite kind of character. She definitely had the best jokes. She was literally like out of the womb when she was on that show. She was so young and she did such a good job on that show. She was holding it up with Debbie Ryan at her old age of 20. She had the most interesting personality, the most vibrant personality out of the kids in my opinion. She is definitely in the running for most iconic sibling on Disney Channel. And if you don't like that,
Don't be afraid to hit that block button.
moving on to Cameron Parks, who was China Parks' older brother on Ant Farm. He was the goof. At the beginning of the show, he was like, oh my god, China, why are you going to my school? You're embarrassing me. Okay, you should be embarrassed of yourself, son. China is a serve. She could be the most popular girl in school if it wasn't for her age. Let's keep it real. But obviously, he did love China. He was always there for her and stood up for her when she was getting bullied by people like Lexi, so he was a good brother. He was a nice guy. Moving on to Tyler James, who was the step brother of Avery on Dog with a Blog. I'm considering Avery the main character on Dog with a Blog, besides the dog with a blog. He was the charismatic, popular guy, but then the show would also kind of portray him as like an airhead, even though we also find out that he's very good at math. It's definitely giving Britney S. Pierce from Glee vibes. How can you be really, really smart at math, but then also be like, duh, duh? That was pretty much the amalgamation of his character. Moving on to Chloe James, who is also the stepsister of Avery. I mean, let's keep it legit. This is a Zuri Ross wannabe. You can't outdo the doer. She is the Barbie. She is the... I don't want to finish that. I'm gonna let Azalea Banks finish that.
You're the Cabbage Patch. She's Marsha. You're Jan.
Moving on to Ernie Cooper, who was the brother of Casey Cooper on Casey Undercover. He was a geek and a nerd, so obviously goof, and like, but at the same time, he was also a computer genius, so he could help out the family with certain missions. He was a hacker, could also engineer things, so he was a smart guy. Him and Casey definitely had a good relationship. They never really got into tiffs, and I think maybe it was probably because Casey kind of felt bad for him. But yeah. Moving on to Parker Rooney, who was the younger brother of Liv and Maddie on Liv and Maddie. He was the mischievous sibling, and he was also passionate about inventing things. Does anyone think he's the most iconic sibling on Disney Channel? Okay. Moving on to Joey Rooney, who was the older brother of Liv and Maddie? Maybe it's just because he was taller that I'm saying that, but he wore glasses, he was quirky, he was goof, but he was also kind of like very endearing and charismatic and charming. He was also clumsy, so he was very Pretty much everyone on this list I'm talking about is like that. But I would say he was definitely the second most important character after Liv and Maddie, so he definitely was important to the show. Moving on to Auggie Matthews. He was there. Moving on to Bret and Chet, Marcus from Best Friends with Ever. Twin'em!
It's Twin'em!
Super good vibes.
Super good vibes only.
Disney Channel loves some good twins. We have Zach and Cody, we have Liv and Maddie, we have the twin brothers of Kim Possible, and I didn't talk about them on this list because let's keep it real. Disney Channel loves some super good vibes. So their characters were definitely airheaded, not the sharpest crayons in the box. They were a little bit okay, it's getting old. Yeah, they were also ginger, so representing for my Scottish ancestors. Thank you. Finally, I'm just going to quickly mention them. There was a bunch of siblings on Stuck in the Middle, but I'm not going to be talking about any of them because are any of them the most iconic sibling on Disney Channel? So that is all of the siblings that I want to talk about. There is a lot of goofs, there is a lot of pranksters, there is a lot of mischievous ones. But after going through all of them, I've come to a decision. The most iconic sibling on Disney Channel is Cory Baxter. I mean, come on, this is a legend. He was such a great character. He had such a good relationship and kind of sibling rivalry with Raven, but at the same time, he also had a lot going for him by himself. He had his own storylines, he had his own personality. He had so much going for him on that show. He was keeping up the laughs with every other actor on that show, to the point where he got his own spin-off show, Cory in the House, right after That's So Raven ended. I mean, it was pretty obvious who the most iconic sibling on Disney Channel is. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? Tell me who I missed and tell me why they are the most iconic. They won't be. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.
La 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 la.